Hey, campfire crew. Let's get it on.
Look, even though it's following you, I can still see it. It's not done with me either, okay? And like I told you, all you can do is pass it along to someone else.
Ruined Family Trip, submitted by Randy. My family had been looking forward to this Memorial Day weekend camping trip for months, hoping to start the summer off right, getting some fresh air and quality time away from screens. I packed up our 4-person tent, our sleeping bags, and all the rest of the gear into the back of my SUV, and my wife Sarah packed the coolers with enough food to last us through Monday. Our 2 daughters, Chloe, who's 15, and Mia, who just turned 12, were actually excited about it, which was a miracle in and of itself for teenage girls. We scored a site at the Pinecrest State Park, which was supposed to be a quiet, family-friendly campground buried deep in the dense pine woods. But the moment we backed into our spot, my stomach dropped. The campsite directly across the narrow gravel road from us looked like a freaking disaster area, overflowing with 3 massive nylon tents, a couple of rusted-out pickups, and lawn chairs scattered everywhere. The group consisted of 2 older, rougher-looking guys who maybe were in their late 40s, and about 6 or 7 teenage boys who seemed to range anywhere from 16 to 19. What bothered me about the whole thing wasn't the size of their group, but the fact that the 2 older guys were already sitting in their camp chairs surrounded by empty beer cans. It was only 2 in the afternoon. And yeah, they were completely ignoring the teenagers who were blasting rap music and throwing a heavy football close to other people's vehicles. By the time the sun started to dip below the tree line on that Friday night, the atmosphere across the road had turned kind of hostile. Sarah and I were just sitting by the fire, trying to enjoy the twilight, and our girls were sitting on a log nearby, just chatting amongst themselves and roasting marshmallows. And then there was a loud burst of laughter from the neighbor's site. I noticed 3 of the older teenage boys staring directly over at our camp, making crude gestures and shouting loud comments about how Chloe was looking real nice in her shorts. Chloe instantly froze. Her face turned bright red as she looked down at the ground, and Mia instinctively moved closer to Sarah. I felt my blood pressure go up immediately, so I stood up and gave the boys a hard stare from across the road, which of course only caused them to laugh and whisper amongst themselves. A little while later, maybe around 9, the girls needed to use the old comfort station, which, like in most campgrounds, was just a concrete bathroom building located about 100 yards down the main road to get to the campsites. I offered to walk with them, but Chloe rolled her eyes and insisted they were fine going together with their flashlights. So off they went, but I did keep a close eye on them as they went. Less than 5 minutes later, both of them came running back into the firelight, completely breathless and visibly trembling. Chloe was crying, and through her shaking breaths, she told us that 3 of the teenage boys had followed them down the road, then cornered them right outside of the bathroom doors and started whispering incredibly vile and explicit things about what they wanted to do to both of them in the dark. My vision literally went blurry with rage, and without even thinking, I went right across the gravel road into the middle of their messy, shitty campsite to confront the adults. The 2 older men were completely wasted at that point. They were slurring their words and practically falling off of their lawn chairs. I saw an empty bottle of wild turkey sitting on the ground between both of them, but I went right over to them and told them to control their damn kids and explained exactly what the boys had just done to my young daughters at the bathrooms. The bigger of the guys, this fat ass with a dirty baseball cap and a stained shirt, just laughed in my face. He told me to calm down because it was just a bunch of boys being boys and doing a little harmless flirting. I told him that it wasn't flirting, and if it happened again, he was going to have a massive problem. But he just said something like, "Aw, piss," and then reached for the bottle that was already empty. The other guy completely blew me off. I went back to our campsite. My fists were clenched, and I realized that those 2 clowns were completely useless. But that night, sleep was absolutely impossible because the teenagers stayed up until 3 in the morning, screaming and cursing and blasting music. But at around 3, a heavy thud rocked the side of our nylon tent, followed by another sharp crack as a large rock bounced off the rain fly right above where my daughters were sleeping. I ripped open the tent zipper and ran outside into the cool night air and caught a glimpse of 2 figures laughing as they darted back into the shadow of the campsite across the street. I went over there a second time, yelling into the darkness, but the 2 adult men just yelled back from their tent, telling me to shut up and go to sleep or they'd come out and make me shut up. I stood there hot as hell for a few seconds and then turned back and finally went to my own tent. Saturday and Sunday got progressively worse, and the harassment escalated. Every single time Chloe or Mia stepped out of our tent, the boys stopped doing whatever the hell it was they were doing, and then stood at the edge of their campsite and stared at them with these creepy-ass grins on their faces. I wanted to wipe those grins right off, but hey, I can't hit a kid, right? On Saturday afternoon, while Sarah and I were trying to prep for our lunch, we noticed that one of the boys had actually walked to the very edge of our site and was pretending to look for a lost football. But his eyes locked entirely on our tent windows. Later that evening, after we had gone out on a hike, where we tried to escape some of this stress, we found that someone had gone into our site and smashed our camp lanterns against the trees that left broken plastic and glass everywhere. And they'd also dragged a dead rotting raccoon carcass and left it at the entrance of our tent. I mean, all of this was blatant bullshit from these kids. It was clear to see. When I looked over at their site, they were all sitting around their fires smirking and whispering while the 2 adults once again drank themselves into a stupor. I was ready to just pack up and leave right then, but the campground was packed and the park office had been closed for the evening, so we were kind of trapped in the back loop with sketchy cell service, meaning that we had to stay there at least one more night. Sunday night was when the entire situation boiled over into bad territory. It was pitch black outside our tent around 10:30, and the woods were completely silent except for the drunken roaring and screaming coming from across the road. Mia had dropped her flashlight near the firewood pile just about 20 feet from our tent, and Chloe went outside with her light to help her sister find it. And then out of nowhere, the largest of the teenage boys, a big kid who looked like a high school football player, rushed out of the shadows from across the road and grabbed Chloe tightly by the upper arm and dragged her a few feet into the darkness toward the tree line while she was screaming at the top of her lungs. And that was it. My brain snapped, and all of the years of patience and civilian restraint vanished in a fraction of a second. For years, I had always told my wife and kids a watered-down version of my past. I didn't meet my wife until I was in my 30s. I simply told them all that I had served a normal tour in the military. But the reality? I spent 12 years in the Special Forces, and I trained extensively to neutralize threats in the most violent and efficient ways possible. Scout's honor. Well, I charged across the gravel road like a freight train and covered that distance before this kid even realized what was happening. I grabbed him by the throat and slammed him onto the hood of one of the pickup trucks so hard the metal buckled beneath him. And the 2 adult males, who again were completely plastered but now fueled by drunken rage, came stumbling out of their lawn chairs, cursing and yelling that they were going to kill me. The heavy-set guy reached into his pocket, pulled out a hunting knife, and lunged wildly at my chest with a vicious downward slash. Well, I easily sidestepped his stupid drunken movement and grabbed his wrist to redirect the blade, and then slapped him with a palm strike directly upward into his nose. He smashed down to the gravel and he hit his head against a rock and was out cold. 3 of the older teenage boys stepped forward and puffed out their chests and had their fists up like they were going to jump me at once. I stepped inside the punch of the first teen and broke his collarbone with a hard strike, and then knocked the legs out from the second one. The third boy stopped what he was doing, and he dropped his hands to his sides and said, "Hey, mister, we don't want any more trouble." "Yeah, you didn't want any trouble. You came looking for it, kid." The other teens kind of backed off, and they realized, finally, they'd run into someone that they couldn't really fuck with anymore. As everything started to quiet down, the blue and red flashing lights of the park ranger's truck finally appeared through the trees. Someone had either gone and found them or gotten through with their sketchy cell service, and now here they were. As the guy got out of his car, he started to ask me questions because I was the only one who could really talk to him, and within 20 minutes there were 3 state police cruisers in the campground. I stood there calmly with my family while the troopers sorted through the absolute mess, took statements from us, and talked to those other kids, and they also reached out to some terrified neighbors who had witnessed the whole thing from a distance. Well, good guys sometimes do win. The police ended up arresting both of the adult males and put the unconscious one in handcuffs before loading him into an ambulance. They also cuffed and loaded the teenage boy who had grabbed Chloe into the back of her cruiser. Yeah, he was 19. And then they rounded up the rest of the kids that had to be picked up by their parents or social services in some cases. By now, it was past 2 a.m. The entire campground loop was awake, and dozens of campers were standing outside their tents watching the entire scene unfold in total silence. I was deeply shaken and filled with adrenaline, and there was absolutely no way I was staying in that place for another minute. Once I was given the okay by the state police, Sarah and the girls and I just whipped all of our gear and our tent and our bags back into my SUV, completely haphazard. Everyone got in, I got the engine started, turned on the headlights, and drove slowly out of that park in the dead of night, leaving a nightmare behind us, while the remaining campers watched us go. We haven't been out camping since. Scouts in the Cemetery, submitted by Deke. I was 12 years old in the summer of 1987 when my best friend Brian and I decided we were going to earn a couple of scouting merit badges in one weekend. We took the whole thing seriously because we were at that age when we wanted to prove we could handle ourselves outdoors. Neither of us knew that our carefully planned camping trip would become one of the most terrifying nights we'd ever had. My family's backyard sat at the edge of our small town, and directly behind our property was an old cemetery that dated back to the early 1800s. There was a rusty iron fence that separated our yard from the graveyard, and a little dirt road ran out to the road that we lived on. The cemetery wasn't huge, but it was old enough that many of the gravestones had tilted over or sunk into the ground. Large oak trees grew throughout the property, their branches hanging over the fence in places that we always had to maintain. It was kind of a pain in the ass. My friends told me to always stay out of it at nighttime. My dad said it was even illegal for us to go in there. During the day, it wasn't particularly creepy. It was just a cemetery. But at night, it seemed like a completely different place. Anyway, I digress. Brian came over early on a Saturday morning carrying his scout handbook and a notebook filled with plans. We spent the day preparing exactly as our merit badges instructed. We measured out distances for our campsite, chose the safest location for our tent, got water together, and then made a list of supplies. After getting permission from my parents to build a small campfire, we rode our bikes to the local hardware and grocery store, which were right next to each other in our little town. We bought hot dogs, marshmallows, got extra matches, aluminum foil dish soap, and a few other necessities. Whatever the scout handbook told us to get, basically. We even purchased some rope because one of the requirements involved practicing knots and camp setup. Looking back, we were dorks. It's funny how proud we were, but proud we were. When we were done, our campsite looked like something out of Boy's Life magazine. The tent was staked perfectly, the cooking area was organized, the fire pit was lined with stones. We even had water buckets nearby and a cleanup station set up exactly according to the diagrams. As sunset came around, we felt like experts. We cooked dinner over the fire and spent an hour cleaning up afterwards, and every plate and utensil was washed and put back into our totes. We checked items off our merit badge requirements and were giving each other congratulations on a successful campout. Then we sat around our little fire. As it crackled away, darkness settled over the yard. We were having a freaking blast. The cemetery beyond the fence slowly disappeared into shadow, And for the most part, I remember us talking about school and girls, baseball, and an upcoming scout camp we wanted to attend in the summer. Then we heard the first sound. At first, I thought it was some kind of bird. The noise drifted from deep within the cemetery and sounded like someone dragging a violin bow across broken glass. It rose and fell unevenly. Neither of us said anything. We just listened. And the sound continued for several seconds before stopping completely. And Brian looked at me and said, "What was that?" And I shrugged. I didn't know what to tell him. A few minutes later, though, another sound emerged from the darkness, and this one was even weirder. It resembled disparate whispering, except the voices seemed to be speaking backward. The noises were like overlapping one another in this weird chorus of murmurs and clicks. The hair on my arms immediately stood up. Suddenly, the cemetery felt much closer than it actually was. We grabbed our flashlights and aimed them through the fence. There was nothing moving over there. We didn't see anything. The gravestones sat motionless beneath the moonlight, and the whispering stopped as soon as we turned our lights on. For a few minutes we played our flashlights around, and everything remained quiet. But then we heard a metallic clanging echoing from somewhere among the graves. It sounded as if someone was striking an iron pipe against another piece of metal, and it was 3 slow strikes, and then more silence. I would like to point out right now that up until this point, no one in my family or myself had ever experienced anything strange with this cemetery. This was a first. By now, Brian was laughing nervously and said, "It's got to be somebody messing with us." And I wanted that explanation to be true too. We saw some movement, and it was a pale shape passing between 2 gravestones near the center of the cemetery. It moved so fast that neither of us got a good look at it. And Brian stood up immediately and said, "Did you see that?" And I nodded. Against our better judgment, we approached the fence. The scout handbook certainly didn't contain instructions for investigating strange figures in graveyards after dark, but we stood there shining our flashlights through the bars anyway. We kept looking at gravestone after gravestone and didn't see anything. But then we heard the sound again. Not the whispering and not the scraping. This sound was entirely different. It sounded like dozens of people taking a deep breath at exactly the same moment, and the noise came from everywhere at once. It was like a long, slow inhalation. Brian whispered, "Let's go back to the fire." But instead, we climbed through a gap in the fence, doing exactly what my father had told me to never do. And even to this day, I don't know why we did it. I guess curiosity was just overpowering our common sense. Immediately, the cemetery felt colder. The air seemed different on the other side of the fence. Our flashlights illuminated row after row of stones and twisted tree roots, and then that's when the whispering returned. The strange voices seemed to be circling us, and neither of us could identify where it was coming from. We walked slowly towards the center of the cemetery, and that's when we found the old angel statue. I'd seen it many times during daylight, just a weathered stone angel atop a family plot near the back of the cemetery. But that night, something was standing beside it, and at first I thought it was another statue. And then it moved. The figure appeared impossibly thin. Its body looked gray in the moonlight, and its arms hung almost to its knees. The strangest part was its head. It seemed tilted sharply to one side, as if its neck were broken. Neither Brian and I said anything, and the figure slowly turned towards us. Our flashlight beams landed directly on it, and I wish I could explain what we saw. The face didn't look human, and it wasn't an animal either. The features seemed weird, as if someone had tried to sculpt a person from memory and then gotten every detail slightly incorrect. Its eyes did reflect white, though. Not yellow and not red. It was white. And the thing sort of smiled at us. Its mouth stretched wide across its face, and at that exact moment, the whispering stopped. Every sound stopped. The entire cemetery became silent, and the figure took one step toward us. There was this horrible clicking noise that came from inside its throat, and then another one on top of that, and then it was like several more all intertwined. The sounds reminded me of sticks knocking together underwater. Brian touched my arm, and we ran. Neither of us cared about dignity or bravery. We just sprinted through the graves, crashed through the spot in the fence, and practically dove back into my yard. When we turned around, the figure was standing near the fence, looking at us, and the moonlight illuminated enough of its shape for us to see it clearly. It stood there motionless for several seconds, and then it stepped backward behind a gravestone and vanished. It didn't walk away, it just disappeared. We spent the rest of the night sitting beside the fire, clutching our flashlights, and neither of us slept. I am surprised looking back now that neither of us ran into my house. We did tough it out there that entire night, terrified out of our minds. At sunrise, we packed up camp and Brian went home, and we never really spoke much about what had happened. But the strangest part is the story doesn't end there. Throughout my teenage years, I occasionally saw that figure again. Never up close, and the strangest thing, never at that cemetery. I would catch sight of it standing at the edge of a distant field or among trees across the road, and it was always far away from me, and always like it was just watching me. Once, when I was 16, I saw it standing beneath a streetlight at the end of our block shortly after midnight, but when I looked back at it, it was gone. And another time, I spotted what appeared to be the same crooked silhouette standing in a field on the other side of my house, nearly a quarter-mile away. It remained there for several minutes before disappearing behind a rise. It never approached me, and I never heard that strange whispering again either, but it was always the same thing. That weird thing standing looking at me from a distance. Brian had experienced similar sightings for years afterward, too. And we would compare notes several times as adults. Yeah, we're still friends. And we discovered our descriptions always matched perfectly. Neither of us can explain what happened that night back in 1987. I mean, maybe there is a logical explanation. Maybe our imaginations amplified something ordinary into something terrifying. I would gladly accept that explanation if not for one detail. Two frightened 12-year-old boys can misinterpret shadows, and they can mistake animals for something else. But what they can't do is spend years afterwards seeing the exact same weird figure staring at them. Whenever we encountered in that cemetery, it wasn't interested in chasing us. It seemed to just want to watch us, and that thought has always frightened me far more than if it had done anything other than watch. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you heard and saw, why not give the video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. It's all free and it all helps out with the algorithms, so I appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description, and consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is also in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other, and until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.